My mother raised her glass at the dinner table and said, "To Brianna, the daughter who actually made something of herself," and laughed. And nobody said a word. Not my father, who was sitting at the head of the table with his wine and his willful blindness, which is a combination he has been perfecting for 61 years. Not my Aunt Patricia. Not my brother-in-law Dale, who was studying the breadbasket with the focused attention of a man who would rather be literally anywhere else. Not my daughter Cora, who was 7 years old and sitting right beside me with her small hands in her lap, wearing the yellow cardigan she had picked out herself that morning because she wanted to look nice for Grandma's dinner. She had gone completely still the moment she heard the word, "actually," the way children go still when they understand something that adults are still pretending not to hear. I put my hand over hers under the table. I did not squeeze. I just placed my hand over hers and held it there, and I kept my face at the temperature I have learned to maintain at these dinners, which is warm enough to pass as fine and cool enough to not give anything away. My sister Brianna, for her part, had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable before she recovered her composure and smiled into her glass. She knows. She has always known. She just finds it easier to take the toast. 3 weeks later, I did something my mother has described since as unhinged, as vindictive, as the kind of thing you do when you want to destroy a family. What I actually did was make one phone call. From a hotel parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon, calm as I have ever been, in a voice that my own mother did not recognize because she has never heard it at full steadiness before. What I said on that call made her sit down on her kitchen floor. Not a chair. The floor, which is the thing that happens when a person's legs decide that the news they are processing is too large to receive standing. She has not, in the 8 months since, been able to properly explain to anyone in the family exactly what I said. That's because to explain it, she would have to admit what preceded it. And that is a thing my mother is structurally incapable of doing. I'm going to tell you everything. But first, let me tell you who I am. My name is Mackenzie Castro, and I was raised in a small city in Northern California called Redding, where the summers are biblical and the winters are confused, and where my mother, Judith, ran the Castro household with the particular authority of a woman who had decided very early on exactly how things were going to go. We had a nice house, yellow siding, white trim, a front porch, with a swing that nobody ever actually sat on because my mother thought it made the house look cluttered. My father, Ron, sold commercial real estate and played golf on Saturdays and practiced the art of the strategic non-comment with such dedication that I genuinely do not know his opinion on a single difficult topic. I have a sister, Brianna, 3 years older, currently the director of marketing at a mid-sized tech company in San Jose, recently engaged to a man named Harris who wears expensive watches and uses the word synergy without irony. I am a nurse. I have been a nurse for 9 years, the last 4 of them in the cardiac unit at a regional hospital 40 minutes from where I grew up. I work 12-hour shifts. I wear compression socks. I carry a granola bar in my pocket most days because lunch happens when it happens. I drive a 2019 Honda CR-V with 74,000 miles on it and a coffee thermos in the cup holder that is never entirely empty. I am, by my mother's accounting, the daughter who did not make something of herself. My husband is Tom. He teaches 7th grade science, which means he is professionally required to be enthusiastic about things that 12-year-olds find embarrassing, and he does this with a sincerity that I find, after 11 years of marriage, genuinely moving. He is patient in the way that people are patient when patience is not performance, when it is simply the natural speed at which they operate. He has been watching my family with a scientist's careful attention since the first Thanksgiving I brought him home, and his assessments, delivered quietly on the drive home from these events, have always been more accurate than I wanted them to be. And there is Cora, 7 years old, 2nd grade, currently obsessed with marine biology in the particular way that 2nd graders are obsessed with things, which is to say completely, with a stack of library books on the nightstand and a running list of questions she tapes to the refrigerator. She is funny and precise and has the same dark eyes as my mother, which is a fact I find simultaneously tender and cruel. And she has spent her entire life being the grandchild who is noticed last, included as an afterthought, celebrated with the energy of someone who has used up most of their enthusiasm on a prior occasion. She knows. She has known for at least 2 years, maybe longer. She just keeps being kind about it because she is 7, and she is still hoping she is wrong. If you grew up as the second-choice child, the one who sat at the table and watched the toast go to someone else, you know exactly what Cora felt in that yellow cardigan. You know the specific arithmetic of that moment. You know how fast a child can subtract. I need you to stay with me because what I did next is the thing I kept not doing for 9 years, and I want to tell you why I finally did it and exactly how it went. Hit subscribe right now because the phone call from the parking lot is the part that changed everything, and I am going to describe it to you in full. And if you think a mother should be able to toast one daughter at a dinner where the other daughter is sitting 2 feet away and calling it fine, if you think actually made something of herself is something you say in front of a nurse and her 7-year-old, give this a like. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been the child who learned to expect less? Because I want to know. I want to know all of it. Here is how the system worked. My mother is a woman of principles. She will tell you this herself. She has principles about punctuality, about thank you notes, about the correct occasion for a good tablecloth, about what constitutes real work versus what she calls service work, which is a phrase she uses with a quality I can only describe as performative neutrality, as if she is simply making a categorical distinction rather than an evaluative one, as if the category itself does not carry the weight she has placed on it. She has principles about gifts. They should be thoughtful, proportional to the occasion, and match to what the recipient actually values. She stated this principle to me explicitly when I was 14 and asked why Brianna's birthday present that year had been a 3-day weekend at a resort in Lake Tahoe. It's about what each person values, my mother said. Brianna values experiences. I was 14. I received a gift certificate to a bookstore and a set of colored pencils. I value experiences too. I just had not been consulted about what I valued, and there was something in my mother's certainty that I wouldn't push back on it that told me she already knew the difference between a principle and a preference. She just needed me to believe they were the same thing. The rule about college was the one that crystallized it. My mother had a rule, stated, explained, repeated with the patience of someone who considers themselves fair-minded, that educational support would be equal for both daughters. Both of us would receive the same amount toward tuition, room, and board. Equal. Principled. No favoritism. What the rule did not account for, because my mother chose not to account for it, was that Brianna had applied to and been accepted at a private university in Los Angeles that cost $48,000 a year, while I had applied to the state school 40 minutes from home, which cost $11,000. The equal contribution covered roughly half of Brianna's costs and 120% of mine, which meant I was the only one who finished college debt-free, which my mother subsequently used as evidence of my good fortune. Mackenzie came out ahead, she told my Aunt Patricia at a family gathering 3 years after I graduated, and she said it with the serenity of someone who has done the math they wanted to do and stopped there. Brianna had $61,000 in student loans. I had none. In my mother's accounting, this made me the lucky one. In reality, it made me the one who had gone to the school that fit the contribution, which is not the same thing as good fortune. It is the thing that happens when you learn at 17 not to want things that require more than you will be given. The rule about holidays was simpler and crueler because it was less codified. It operated on pure preference, which is harder to argue with because it cannot be debated on its own terms. At Thanksgiving, Brianna's dietary preferences were accommodated. The stuffing was made with gluten-free breadcrumbs starting in 2017, the year she announced she was sensitive to gluten, and my mother treated this announcement with the care and precision of a culinary professional adapting to a medical requirement. I am vegetarian. I have been vegetarian since I was 19. For 6 years of Thanksgiving dinners, I was told there was plenty to eat. The sides, the rolls, the salad. In 2021, my mother made a small roasted vegetable tart and placed it on the table with the energy of someone expecting recognition for an act of generosity. It was the first time in 6 years. I thanked her warmly. I ate it. I said nothing about the 6 years of rolls and sides. This is what you learn to do when you grow up being the manageable one. You are grateful for the tart, and you do not ask about the years before the tart. What is hardest to say, and what I want to say carefully because I want to say it right, is the way my mother talked about what Brianna and I did in the world. It was not dramatic. It was never a declaration or a policy statement. It was a texture, a consistent, barely perceptible tilt in every sentence that mentioned either of us. When Brianna closed a deal or got a promotion, my mother's voice moved into a register I can only describe as enlivened. She sat up, she used her hands, she said, "Brianna has such a gift for this kind of thing," and meant it in a way that suffused the room. When I described something at work, a difficult case, a patient who had stabilized after something touch and go, the particular satisfaction of 12 hours that went exactly as they should, my mother listened with the careful attention of someone who is performing interest. "That must be very rewarding," she would say. Not, "You are extraordinary at this," not "What you do matters," rewarding. As if nursing were a hobby with benefits rather than a profession that requires constant judgment, technical precision, and the ability to hold someone's fear and your own competence at the same time. Cora heard all of this. Children do not miss texture. They are extraordinarily sensitive to it, actually. More sensitive than adults, because they have not yet learned to discount the information their instincts are sending. Cora began, somewhere around age 5, to behave at my mother's house the way a small animal behaves in an environment it has not quite assessed as safe, carefully, with reduced amplitude. She did not run inside. She used her indoor voice without being asked. She said thank you for everything, including things she had not wanted, with a precision and speed that broke my heart a little each time because I recognized it. I had learned that same speed, that same precision. You say thank you before anyone can see what you actually felt, and then nobody has to deal with your actual feeling, and the dinner continues, and everyone can tell themselves it went well. The moment I understood that Cora was doing what I had done, not just once, not just a phase, but as a practice, as a learned behavior she was now running automatically in my mother's presence, was a Saturday morning in March, about 8 months before the birthday dinner. My mother had organized a family brunch to celebrate Oliver's 5th birthday, Oliver being Brianna's son. My daughter Cora, who is Oliver's cousin and was at that point 6, turned to me in the car on the way over and said, "Is there going to be a cake?" I said probably, yes, it was Oliver's birthday. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Is there going to be cake for me too, or just for Oliver?" Not whining, not complaining, genuine, careful inquiry. She was managing her expectations in real time before she walked in the door, at 6 years old, on a Saturday morning going to a family brunch. I said, "There will be cake for everyone, Bug." She nodded. She believed me, because I was her mother and she trusted me. But the act of asking told me everything. She had already learned the architecture. She already knew that her presence at Grandma's table was a different category than Oliver's presence. She was already doing the work of protecting herself from a disappointment she could not name, but had already experienced enough times to anticipate. She did the saddest thing children do. She made herself smaller before anyone asked her to. I watched my daughter manage her own expectations in the car on the way to her grandmother's house, and I sat with what I knew, which was this. I had spent 9 years, the 9 years since Cora was born, telling myself that my mother's preferences were my mother's business, that family is complicated, that everyone has blind spots, that Cora was resilient and loved and would be fine. I had spent 9 years absorbing the arrangement because the arrangement was familiar, and because disrupting it would cost something I wasn't sure I was willing to spend. I looked at my daughter in the rearview mirror, carefully asking about cake, and I understood that the cost of not disrupting it was being paid by someone who had not agreed to pay it, and she was 6 years old. And I was done. There is also the money. There is always the money, and in my family, it had a particular shape that took me a long time to fully see. My mother handled the finances of the Castro family the way she handled most things, with the language of fairness and the logic of preference. When my father's mother passed in 2016 and left a small inheritance, $43,000, split between my father and his 2 siblings, my mother suggested that a portion of my father's share be set aside for the grandchildren's futures. This was presented as an equally shared gesture. There was an account opened. It was described more than once as being, for both girls, equally. What I did not know, because I did not think to verify it and because trust in families tends to run until something breaks it, was that between 2016 and the time I started paying closer attention in 2022, the account had been drawn down in ways that were not equal. Money had been moved to help Brianna with a down payment on her condo, $22,000, presented at the time as a loan, though no paperwork existed and no repayment schedule was ever discussed. Additional amounts had been used to help cover Brianna's wedding costs in 2019, the rehearsal dinner, the flowers, a portion of the venue. I had had a small, simple wedding in 2013 that Tom and I funded ourselves. My mother contributed $500 toward the catering, which I was grateful for, and which I now understand was a different order of magnitude than what came later, when the right occasion presented itself. I found this out gradually, the way you find out things in families, sideways, accidentally, through a conversation that wasn't meant to be that conversation. My father's sister Renata mentioned the down payment loan at a holiday dinner in 2022, referring to it as though I obviously knew about it, as though it were settled history. I kept my face neutral. I asked one or two clarifying questions that sounded like casual curiosity and were anything but. That night at home, I asked Tom what he thought. He said, in the particular careful way he has when he is pretty sure something is true and doesn't want to be the one to say it first. I think there might be a pattern here worth looking at more closely. We looked at it more closely over the next few weeks. I asked my father two careful questions. Ron, who loves me and is a coward about conflict, and will answer a direct factual question even when he would prefer not to. The answers told me what I needed to know. The total, to the best of my accounting. And my accounting is careful, because I am a person who tracks things. Because being a person who tracks things is one of the adaptations you make when you grow up in a household where the rules are applied unevenly, was somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 that had moved from the family inheritance toward Brianna's life and not toward mine. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Incrementally. Over 7 years. In the language of loans, and just this once, and she's going through a difficult stretch, which is the language families use when they want to be generous to one person, without being asked to be equally generous to another. I did not confront my mother about this. Not immediately. Not loudly. I tucked it away the way I tuck things away, carefully, in the organized mental drawer where I keep information I am not yet ready to act on, waiting for the moment when the accumulation becomes a decision. That moment came 8 months later, at a birthday dinner, when my mother raised a glass and told me in front of my daughter, in front of my father and my aunt and my brother-in-law, that my sister was the daughter who had actually made something of herself. That was the night the drawer opened. I woke the morning after Brianna's birthday dinner the way you wake when something has resolved in the night, not dramatically, not with sudden energy, but with the quiet certainty of a person who has stopped arguing with themselves. The argument was over. The decision had been made somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, without my conscious participation, and I found it waiting for me when I opened my eyes, complete and calm, like a letter that had been slipped under the door while I slept. Tom was already downstairs. I could hear the particular sounds of him making coffee, the specific rhythm of our kitchen on an ordinary morning, the click of the electric kettle, the quiet of someone trying not to wake the house. I came downstairs and he handed me a mug before I asked for it, which is a thing he does, and he looked at my face and did not say anything for about 30 seconds, and then he said, "You decided something." Not a question. "Yes," I said. "Okay," he said, and he went back to his coffee and his phone and his morning, because Tom understands that there are decisions you assist with and decisions you witness, and this was a witnessing situation. Cora came downstairs 20 minutes later, trailing a blanket and her current marine biology book, and she looked at me the way she looks at weather, checking, assessing. I smiled at her and meant it, which is a different smile than the one I maintain at family dinners, and she felt the difference immediately, because Cora always does. Her shoulders dropped about half an inch. She sat down at the kitchen table and poured herself cereal and did not ask anything, and the not asking was its own kind of relief. She didn't need to ask because something in the house had already told her what she needed to know. "We might not be going to Grandma's as often for a while," I said, because Cora deserved honesty in terms she could hold. She looked at me over her cereal. "Okay," she said. "Then, that's okay." I opened the banking app that afternoon, while Cora was at a friend's house and Tom was in the backyard doing the thing he does on weekend afternoons, which is rearranging the garden with the meditative focus of a man who finds physical order restorative. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and I went through every transfer, every linked account, every arrangement I had with my mother's household. There were fewer of these than there might have been, because I had never been the family's primary financial resource in the way that some people in this situation are. My mother had not asked me, by and large, for money directly. What she had done was more diffuse and in some ways harder to identify. She had leveraged my reliability, my competence, my tendency to handle things without being asked twice. I was the one who organized the family's medical appointments when my father had his cardiac scare in 2020. I am a cardiac nurse, and I did this in my off hours without discussion, because it was needed and I could do it, and nobody suggested that was unusual. I was the one who had coordinated my grandmother's estate paperwork when she passed, spending approximately 40 hours of my own time on phone calls and document management and driving to the county clerk's office twice, because the filing system in Reading is, to put it diplomatically, not optimized. I was the one who, for 3 consecutive years, had been contributing $200 a month to what my mother called a family occasions fund, which I had set up during the pandemic when we were all trying to stay connected, and which had been, I now understood, used entirely to fund Brianna's engagement party in 2023. A party to which Cora had been invited as what felt like an afterthought, handed a name tag at the door by a coordinator who looked surprised to see a child, seated at a table near the kitchen with two other small cousins while Oliver sat at the head table with the adults. I canceled the occasion's fund transfer. $200 a month, gone in 4 seconds. I flagged the account for review and drafted a note to my bank about removing my mother as an authorized secondary contact, a status she had held since my 20s and which I had never thought to revisit. I went through every automatic payment, every shared subscription, every small arrangement that had accumulated over a decade of being the daughter who handled things. Each cancellation was small and took about 5 seconds. The accumulation of them took 18 minutes. When I was finished, I sat with the phone in my hand and felt the specific sensation of a person who has just returned a weight they had been carrying so long they had stopped noticing it was there. Not the absence of weight, exactly, but the memory of what their hands felt like before. Then I made the call. I drove to the parking lot of the hospital where I work, which is a thing I do sometimes when I need to think. There is a particular corner of that lot near the east wing where you can see the mountains on a clear day, and it was a clear day. I sat in my CRV with the thermos of coffee and I called my mother's phone. She answered on the second ring. She had a particular quality in her voice when she answered that told me she was performing nonchalance. She had been waiting for a call and had decided to sound like she hadn't been. "Mackenzie," she said. "What is it?" "I want to talk to you about some things," I said. "I'm going to say them, and I'd like you to let me finish before you respond." A pause. Then, "Okay. I know about the inheritance account," I said. "I know about the down payment and the wedding money. I know the timeline and the amounts. I've done the math. I kept my voice at its working register, the one I use in the cardiac unit when I'm explaining something serious to a family in a waiting room. Steady and clear and without drama. I also want to tell you that I'm done contributing to the Family Occasions Fund, and I'm removing you as secondary contact on my accounts. And I want to tell you that what you said at the birthday dinner, in front of Cora, is not something I'm going to absorb and move past the way I usually do. Silence. Not the silence of someone choosing their words. The silence of someone sitting down without meaning to. I heard on her end the faint scrape of a chair. Or no, not a chair. Something lower. The particular sound of someone finding the floor because the floor is closer. She had sat down on the kitchen floor. I recognized it from the quality of the ambient sound, the change in the acoustics. "Mackenzie," she said. "I know," I said. "I'll call you in a few days. I just needed you to know." And I hung up. In the parking lot of the hospital where I go every third day and hold someone's fear in my hands and tell them the truth about what is happening to their heart, with the mountains visible in the east on a clear Tuesday in October, with my coffee thermos cooling in the cup holder. Calm as I have ever been. The calls began arriving within the hour. My mother, then my father, twice, then Brianna, which surprised me, because Brianna generally processes family conflict by waiting for it to resolve itself. My Aunt Patricia called at 9:15 the following morning and opened with, "I don't want to get involved, but your mother is very distressed." My mother's closest friend Diane left a voicemail that began, "Judith called me in tears," and covered a range of themes including family loyalty, ingratitude, and the importance of keeping things in perspective. I listened to all of it. I responded to almost none of it. My father called a third time, on the second evening, and I answered because Ron, despite his studied avoidance of conflict, loves me in the uncomplicated way that some fathers love their children, without conditions attached to it, even when the conditions might make his life easier. "Mac," he said, which is what he has called me since I was small, "can you just tell me if you're okay?" "I'm okay, Dad," I said. "I need some time to let things settle. I'll talk to you when I'm ready." "Okay," he said. And then, she shouldn't have said that. At the dinner. She shouldn't have said it. He said it quietly, without drama, in the voice of a man who knows that saying it does not undo the years he spent not saying it, but is saying it anyway, because it is the true thing, and because it is all he has. It cost him something to say it, and I felt the cost of it, and I was grateful. "I know, Dad," I said. Then there was Brianna. She texted first. A long text, the kind that shows up on your phone in segments, that had the quality of something that had been drafted and redrafted and still wasn't quite right. The central point of it was, "I don't think Mom meant it the way it came out. She talks about your work all the time. She's proud of you. I think she just gets weird when she's nervous about the party." I read it 3 times. I thought about responding. I didn't. Not yet. The text confirmed something I had suspected, which was that Brianna's experience of our family was so different from mine that she genuinely could not see what I was describing. The way you cannot see a tilt in a floor you have been standing on your whole life. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. Not an email. A letter in a white envelope with my mother's neat, looping handwriting on the front. My mother writes letters when she wants something to be permanent, when she wants a record of having tried. I recognized the strategy. Inside was 2 paragraphs and a closing. The first paragraph was about her intentions, about how she had never meant for me to feel the things she seemed to be feeling. The second paragraph was about the party. Not the inheritance money. Not Cora. The party, specifically the money I had confirmed I would no longer contribute to the annual family occasions fund, and whether that meant I was withdrawing from the planning for her upcoming 65th birthday celebration, which she had been discussing since January and which the occasions fund was, she now clarified, partly intended to support. I set the letter on the kitchen table. I sat with it for a moment. I felt, with extraordinary clarity, the thing that had been true for years, and that I had been careful not to look at directly, that in my mother's accounting, my withdrawal was significant primarily because of what it meant for her arrangements, not because of what it meant about her daughter. The emotional wound she was processing was financial in nature. She had written a letter. She had used her best handwriting. And the second paragraph was about the party. I picked up the letter. I folded it back into the envelope. I put it in the kitchen drawer where I keep things I'm not sure what to do with yet, next to the takeout menus and the spare batteries and the birthday candles. I made dinner. Cora and Tom came in from the backyard where they had been doing something involving a hose and what appeared to be a water balloon experiment that had not entirely gone according to plan. They were both damp and laughing. I watched them dry off at the kitchen sink and felt, with a completeness that surprised me, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 3 days after the letter, Brianna called. Not a text this time, a call, on a Sunday evening, which told me she was serious. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, and I understood from the quality of her voice that she had been sitting with something difficult and had decided to say it rather than put it away. "About the inheritance account." A pause. "I've been thinking about it since you first mentioned it to Mom, and I think I knew it wasn't equal. The down payment. I knew it came from somewhere, and I didn't ask the questions I should have asked." I sat down at the kitchen table. Tom, in the living room with a book, looked up. I shook my head slightly. "It's okay. I'm okay." And he nodded and went back to his page. "I didn't know the full amount," Brianna said. "Or I told myself I didn't need to know, which is maybe worse." She stopped. Then, "And I want to say something about the dinner, about what Mom said. I should have said something at the table. I've said it 100 times in my head since then, and I didn't say it when it mattered. I'm sorry for that." I stayed quiet for a moment, not because I was deciding whether to accept it, but because I wanted to make space for what she had said to exist before I moved on from it. It mattered. Not as a solution. One conversation does not solve the architecture of 37 years, but as a data point of a different kind, evidence that my sister was capable of this, that underneath the accumulated comfort of the arrangement, there was a person who could look at it clearly when she chose to. "Thank you," I said, "for saying that." "I don't know what you need from me," she said. "I don't know yet either," I said. "But I think starting by being honest with each other about what happened is the right place." "Yeah," she said. A long pause. "It really is." When I hung up, Tom looked over the top of his book. "How do you feel?" "Like something shifted," I said. "Not fixed, but shifted." "That's something," he said. "It is," I said. The conversation with my mother took longer to happen, and it happened on her terms and mine simultaneously, which is to say we were both ready, and neither of us was ready, and we did it anyway because the alternative was calcification. She called on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after the birthday dinner and asked, with a formality that told me she had rehearsed the question, whether she could come over. I said yes. She arrived at 11 with a coffee cake from the German bakery on 2nd Street, which is her apology language. She has always brought food when she wanted to signal effort without having to start with words. I accepted it and made coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table. Tom had taken Cora to the farmer's market. The morning light through the window over the sink was the pale gold of November in Northern California, which is different from any other light in the world. My mother looked older than the last time I had really looked at her, which is a thing that happens when you see someone frequently, and then stop seeing them, and then see them again. She is 64, She has her mother's cheekbones and her father's stubbornness, and both of these things are visible on her face in different proportions depending on the day. That morning, the stubbornness was receding and the cheekbones were doing something more vulnerable. Not soft. My mother is not a soft person, but opened a degree or two, the way a window is opened. I talked to my doctor, she said, after we had sat in silence long enough that it had graduated from uncomfortable to something else. About Brianna and you, about the way I've been. She looked at the table. She referred me to someone, a therapist. I've had 2 appointments. I waited. She asked me about my mother said. My mother had a favorite too. It was my brother. I always knew it, and I always told myself it didn't affect me, that I was fine. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, the way you hold something warm when you are trying to stay steady. I think I'm starting to understand that I reproduced something I hated, not on purpose, but not by accident either, because I didn't look at it. She looked up at me. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you deserve to know where it came from. Not as an excuse, as information. I looked at my mother, at Judith Castro, née Archer, who gave me my stubbornness and my dark hair and my tendency toward silence when I am processing difficult things. And I thought about what it must have cost her to sit in a therapist's office at 64 and talk about being her mother's second-choice child. I thought about the weight of that, carried for 60 years before being named. I thought about the way it moves through families like water through rock, not dramatic, not sudden, just inevitable if nobody interrupts the course. I believe you, I said, and I think it matters that you're looking at it. I set my mug down. What I need you to understand is that knowing where it came from doesn't change what it cost. Cora sat at your table in her yellow cardigan and felt what I felt at every table for 30 years. And that's not okay. And me knowing you didn't mean it doesn't make it okay. What makes it different is what comes next. My mother's jaw moved. She was holding something, pressing it down. What comes next? She said. You treat Cora like your granddaughter, I said. Specifically, equally, deliberately. Not better than Oliver. The same as Oliver. And the first time you don't, I leave. No speech, no negotiation. I just leave, and we take a longer break. I said it without raising my voice. I'm not giving you a list of rules. I'm telling you one thing. That's the one thing. She nodded, very slowly. Then she said, her birthday is in February. It is, I said. I'd like to take her somewhere, she said. Just her. Somewhere she picks. I thought of Cora and her marine biology books, her running list of questions on the refrigerator, her careful asking in the car about cake. I thought of what it would mean to her to be chosen, not included. Chosen. First. I'll ask her, I said. If she wants to, I'll let you know. My mother nodded. She picked up her coffee. She drank. We sat in the November light for another half hour, talking about smaller things. My father's knee, the German bakery, the cold snap that had come early that year. It was not a reconciliation. It was something quieter and more sustainable. A negotiation between 2 people who share blood and history and injury, and who have decided, for now, to try to do this differently. The family wasn't healed, but it was honest in a way it had never been before. And honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, is a better foundation than comfort built on a lie. 6 months after the birthday dinner where my mother said, actually, the house on Millbrook Lane had a quality I was still learning to describe. Not quieter, in fact noisier, because a house where a 7-year-old is not calibrating herself is a louder house. A house with more thudding on the stairs and more singing from the bathroom and more questions called from one room to another without first checking whether a question is welcome. Lighter is the word. Lighter is always the word for this, I think. Like the air after rain, when there's more oxygen and less pressure and everything smells slightly green. Cora went back to being Cora at home. She had always been Cora at home. That was not the thing that had changed. What changed was the absence of the decompression she used to need after visits to my mother's house. The hour of extra quietness, the slightly retracted quality, the way she would sit in the car on the way home and look out the window and not talk. She still does that sometimes because she is 7, and sometimes children look out windows and think about things. But the particular quality of it, the recalibration, the managing down of self, that was gone, or going. It goes slowly, the undoing of learned smallness, but it goes. Tom noticed things the way Tom notices things, by reporting them with the scientific specificity of a person who finds reality more interesting than any story you could tell about it. She told a joke at dinner last night that I'm pretty sure was intended for adults, he said one morning, over coffee, about the life cycle of jellyfish. I don't entirely understand how it was a joke, but she was very pleased with herself. I knew the joke. It was extremely dark for a 7-year-old, and I had laughed genuinely, which is the right response when your child makes a dry observation about mortality and marine biology. I told him that, and he nodded. Good, he said. That's good. And he went back to his coffee with the satisfied expression of someone whose data is confirming his hypothesis. The money, the $200 a month that had been leaving my account for 3 years toward the occasions fund, the secondary authorization I had removed from my accounts, the mental energy that had been quietly allocated to navigating the arrangements of my family's financial life, all of that came back to me in different forms, not all at once and not dramatically, the way that river channels widen when you remove a dam, gradually, with accumulation. Tom and I started talking seriously about a trip, a real trip, not a long weekend, but something with an itinerary and a destination Cora had never been to. She has been asking about the Pacific Northwest since she was 5, when she read about the tide pools on the Oregon coast and added, "See a sea star in real life" to the list on the refrigerator. We booked it for spring. It is the most uncomplicated thing I have done in years. My father started coming around more. Not to the house exactly. Ron is not a man who drops by. He plans arrivals with the precision of a man who respects that other people have lives. But calling more, checking in with a directness he had not previously deployed. I think something shifted in him the night he said, "She shouldn't have said that." I think he had been waiting to say that for a long time, and the act of saying it moved something in him, broke a dam of his own making, and what came through was not a flood, but a steadier flow of actual contact. He took Cora to a baseball game in November, just the two of them. She does not particularly like baseball. She made observations about the geometry of the outfield that my father found very funny, and has repeated to 3 separate people since. He called me afterward and said, "She's something, Mac." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "I know you know. I just wanted to say it out loud." Through Brianna, who had, in the month since our Sunday phone call, been doing something I can only describe as quietly recalibrating her own understanding of our family, I learned what had been happening on my mother's side of things. Judith Castro had hired a bookkeeper in November, which she had been resisting for 15 years on the grounds that managing her own finances was a matter of self-sufficiency, and which she had finally done after a conversation with her therapist that Brianna described as apparently pretty significant. The bookkeeper helped her restructure a series of arrangements that had, without anyone exactly intending it, become structurally dependent on Brianna's husband Harris's income and various informal family transfers, mine included. The restructuring was uncomfortable and required some adjustments to my mother's life, a smaller holiday gathering, a later timeline on the kitchen renovation she had been planning, a renegotiation of certain subscriptions and accounts. My mother did all of this with what Brianna described as a lot of sighing, but also, I think, some genuine relief. The relief, I suspected, was about the simplicity. When a system is built on an informal architecture of favors and expectations, the maintenance of that system requires constant negotiation and the low-grade anxiety of things that are never quite formalized. When you take the informal architecture apart and build something straightforward in its place, you lose the flexibility, but you also lose the anxiety. And my mother, whatever else she is, has been anxious for a long time. I recognize the anxiety because I inherited it, and then spent 20 years learning to distinguish it from clear thinking. "She's different," Brianna told me, one afternoon in December when we had managed a phone call that lasted long enough to get through the surface layer and into something more honest. I don't know if better is the right word, but different. She asks about Cora now. Not like she used to. Not the obligatory, "How is she?" but actually asks. Like she wants to know. She paused. She asked what her favorite animal was. Mom has never asked about favorite animals. "Sea stars," I said. "Obviously sea stars," Brianna said, and for the first time in a very long time we laughed together in a way that did not have any careful management in it. What I keep is simple. I keep a photograph, tucked into the frame of the mirror in my bedroom, of me and Cora at the hospital where I work. This was taken on a Take Your Child to Work day about 2 years ago, the last time we did that, when Cora spent 4 hours asking questions of the nursing staff with the systematic thoroughness of a very small researcher. In the photograph, I am in my scrubs, and she is wearing a paper surgical cap she found somewhere and insisted on keeping on her head for the rest of the day. We are both laughing at something the photographer, who was Tom, had said that I no longer remember. We look like ourselves, completely without modification, like ourselves. I kept that photograph before any of this happened. I keep it now in the same place, but I look at it differently. When I see it now, I see what it documents. Not just a good afternoon, not just a funny photo, but evidence that there was always a version of this life that did not require my daughter to make herself smaller to be welcomed into her own family. That version existed. I just needed to stop paying for the other version. I want to say something now, directly to you, if you are the person I think some of you are. You are the person who grew up being told you were easy, independent, low maintenance, self-sufficient. You were told these things in warm voices by people who meant them, partly as compliments. And you received them as compliments because you were a child, and children receive what they are given. What you did not know, what nobody told you, because nobody tells you this, is that low maintenance is sometimes code for, we have decided how much you get, and we have also decided that the amount is correct, and the story we have agreed to tell about it is that you need less. You were not low maintenance. You were undemanding. Those are not the same thing. You learned not to demand, because experience taught you that demanding would not result in more being given. It would result in conflict, in the recalibration of expectations that had already been set, in the specific loneliness of being told you were asking for too much in a family where asking itself was the problem. You ate the grocery store cake. You said thank you for the bus pass while your sister got the car with the red ribbon. You carried the boxes for the birthday party you were not the subject of. You helped. You were reliable. You were the one people called when something needed organizing, because you organized it well and without complaint, and nobody stopped to think about what it cost you, and you didn't tell them because you had learned very early that telling them had consequences that were harder to manage than the cost of the thing itself. You are not a doormat. You are not a pushover. You are not someone who lacked the spine to stand up for yourself. You are someone who learned, in the most formative years of your life, that your comfort was a secondary priority in a system that would not easily change. And you adapted. You became good at the table. You became gracious about the things you were not given. You built a life with what you had, and what you had was less than what someone else had, and what you built with it was real and yours and not contingent on anyone's approval or assistance. The car isn't the point. The party isn't the point. The graduation gift, the college support, the inheritance money that moved in one direction without a family meeting. None of those individual things are the point. The point is what those things accumulated into. A message, delivered repeatedly over years, in the language of birthday parties and gift cards and toasts at family dinners, that someone else in the room was worth more celebrating. And you heard that message, and you were not imagining it. And the part of you that knew, that registered it and filed it and quietly carried it, that part of you was right. There was someone who saw you. For me, it was my father's sister Renata, a woman who has been watching my family with dry, fond accuracy since before I was born, who calls every few months and asks questions that are precise and interested, and which have, over the years, helped me triangulate my own experience against the map of someone else's observation. She did not ride in and save me. She did not confront my mother or make speeches or do anything dramatic. She just saw, and said so, occasionally, in ways that were small but permanent. "I see what you're carrying," she said once, years ago, in a context I no longer remember. "It's more than you should have to carry. That's all. 7 words. But they were the right 7 words at the right time, and they did something that statements of love and pride and accomplishment had not managed to do, which was tell me that what I was experiencing was real. Not imagined, not oversensitized, not the product of the difficulty I was told I had with accepting things. Real, true, visible to someone else. If you have a Renata, a person who sees without needing to be told, who notices the carrying, that person is a gift. I hope you tell them so. The current state of things, I have a rule. It is simple, and I state it at the beginning of any conversation with my mother that begins to move in a particular direction. I'm going to stop you there, and if it continues, I'm going to end the call. The particular direction is the one where comparison enters, where the implicit accounting begins, where the language of Brianna's success and what I do with my life and what things matter starts arriving. My mother has tested the rule 3 times in 8 months. The first time I executed it and she did not call back for 4 days, which was hard. The second time she called back in an hour, and the conversation was shorter and more careful and genuinely better. The third time she stopped herself mid-sentence. I heard her stop, heard the small correction, and said, "Never mind. Tell me about Cora," which is possibly the most progress I have witnessed from my mother in 30 years of witnessing her. Not transformation, a choice. One specific, deliberate choice in one moment. I'll take it. Brianna and I talk on the phone now with a frequency and a quality that neither of us managed in the 34 years before this, which is both a grief and a gift. It is a grief because we had decades we could have talked like this. It is a gift because we have the rest of our lives ahead of us, and now we know how. She is going to be a good sister-in-law to Tom. She is already a better aunt to Cora than she was. She asked Cora about sea stars, unprompted, at Christmas. Cora talked for 22 minutes. Brianna listened and asked follow-up questions. I watched them from across the room and felt something I do not quite have a word for. Not victory, not vindication, not even relief exactly. Something more like this. This is what it was supposed to be. This is what we lost time on. Let's not lose more. It is a Tuesday in early spring, and the tide pools on the Oregon coast are exactly what Cora needed them to be. I am sitting on a rock watching her crouch at the edge of the water with a tide pool identification guide laminated against the spray, which she requested specifically, and which Tom laminated specifically, and she is pointing at things and telling Tom what they are with the authority of a person who has been waiting for this particular opportunity for 2 years. The water is cold and the sky is the particular gray-blue of the Pacific Northwest, which is different from every other sky, heavier and softer at the same time. Cora is wearing rubber boots that are slightly too big, which she selected herself on the grounds that she wanted room to grow into them. In my jacket pocket, I have 2 things. One is my phone, with a photo I took 20 minutes ago of Cora finding her first sea star, a purple one, clinging to a rock at the edge of the water, real and specific and completely itself. Her face in the photo is the face of a person receiving exactly what they had been hoping for. The other is a piece of folded paper, a note that my mother slipped to me at Christmas while everyone was busy in the kitchen and the tree lights were doing the particular thing they do on a winter evening. The note is brief. It says, "Cora is the best thing in that yellow cardigan. I'm working on being someone who deserves to know her. Mom, I have read it 7 times. I will probably read it many more. Not because it fixes anything, not because it undoes the birthday dinner or the toast or the 40-something thousand dollars or the years of grocery store cakes. Those things don't get undone. What the note is not an undo. It is a start. A small, real, handwritten start from a woman who is 64 years old and trying to learn something she should have learned earlier and is learning now anyway. That counts for something. I have decided it counts for something. I look at the photo of Cora's face at the tide pool. I look at my daughter, still crouching in her 2 big boots, explaining something about sea star regeneration to Tom with the focused urgency of someone who has very important information to convey and a limited tide window in which to convey it. What I would tell myself at 31, in the parking lot of the hospital after a 12-hour shift, driving home through Redding on a night when I had spent the day holding someone else's fear, and then came home to a house where my own daughter was quietly managing her expectations. You are allowed to stop carrying this. You are allowed to be more than the easy one. You are allowed to take up the space you have been given a narrower version of since you were old enough to understand the dimensions. Your daughter is watching you. Show her what you do when the accommodation stops feeling like love and starts feeling like its own kind of diminishment. Show her that you know the difference. Cora looks up from the tide pool and finds me with her eyes, the way she does from across rooms and distances, the checking in that is her version of comfort. I wave. She waves back, enormous, with her whole arm, in the 2 big rubber boots at the edge of the Pacific, with a sea star on the rock beside her and 2 more years of questions on the laminated card in her hand. I want to ask you something before I go. 2 things, actually, and I want you to answer them in the comments, because I genuinely read every single one. Not the way people say that, but actually, because your stories are the reason I tell mine. First, when did you know? When did you know that what your family was doing wasn't just normal family complication, but was a pattern, a specific, structural unfairness that had been running long enough to have its own momentum? Was it a moment? A sentence? A toast at a dinner table? I want to know when it clicked, because I think that moment is different for everyone, and I think understanding it matters. Second, did you stay in contact, or did you step back, or did you do what I did, which is something in between? Not estrangement, not pretending nothing happened, but a different kind of relationship built on one rule and a lot of careful watching? Because I know there are people in the comments who are still at the table, still absorbing it, still telling themselves it's not that bad. And I want you to know, it's okay to describe it accurately. That's all. Not to fix it tonight, not to make a phone call tomorrow. Just to say the thing that is true, even if only to yourself. You were not imagining it. The floor was tilted, and you were not the one who tilted it. If you stayed this long, your like is how you tell me you recognize something in this story. It cost you nothing. It means everything to me because it means I'm not the only one. And if you want to hear about Cora's birthday in February, what my mother did, how she did it, what my daughter's face looked like when she understood she was being chosen first, for once, without condition, subscribe right now because I am not done telling this story, and the February chapter is the one that made me cry at a kitchen table in the best possible way. My mother once told a room full of people with a laugh that one of her daughters actually made something of herself. I am a cardiac nurse. I have held the hands of people in their most afraid moments and told them the truth about what is happening to their hearts. I have made something of myself. I made it with what I had, which was less than what was given to someone else, and I made it anyway, and it is entirely mine, and it is enough. It is more than enough. It is a sea star on a rock at low tide, and my daughter's face when she found it, and a note in a jacket pocket that says I'm working on it, and Tom laminating a tide pool guide because that is who he is, and this particular gray-blue sky over this particular coast on this particular Tuesday in spring. That's the whole story. That's all of it. That's the thing I kept trying to say.